I am Elena Hart, a decorated army officer, and this is the story of how my father nearly shattered the proudest moment of my life. The chapel doors loomed tall and dark, their hinges groaning as sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting the aisle in fractured blues and golds. My father, Charles Hart, sat stiffly in the front row, dressed in his finest tailored suit, his expression carved into that familiar mask of superiority I'd grown up resenting. He hadn't come to honor me. He had come to silently measure me against the daughter he wished he had raised, the one who would have chosen lace and pearls instead of medals and stripes. His jaw flexed when I entered, his eyes locked on the rank insignia glinting across my shoulders. To him, those symbols were not earned victories. They were an affront, a public refusal to obey the image he wanted me to uphold. The curl of his lip told me he thought the day was already his triumph, that this wedding would be remembered not as a celebration but as the moment his daughter made herself a spectacle. Every step I took toward the altar carried years of his dismissal, but my boots struck the floor with a steadiness born of command. My uniform was crisp, unyielding, the opposite of the disdain in his eyes. The weight of his disappointment pressed against me like it always had, but this time it didn't bend me. I was no longer the quiet girl overlooked at family gatherings. I was a soldier who had carried lives, decisions, and battles no one in that pew could ever comprehend. The organ swelled, the congregation shifted uneasily, unsure of how to interpret the scene. My father's smirk widened, as though convinced my presence in uniform sealed my alienation from his world. What he didn't realize was that everything in that room was about to change. Respect was about to be redefined, and the words that would shatter his certainty were already marching closer. A few hours earlier, I had sat alone in the bridal suite, staring at the white dress uniform spread neatly across the chair. I had earned it through sweat, discipline, and sacrifice, yet in that moment, it felt heavier than body armor. My phone buzzed, its glow cutting through the silence. A message from my father. His text was cruel and deliberate. "Don't humiliate us by wearing that ridiculous outfit." To him, my career was a childish rebellion, and my uniform a stain on the image he wanted to parade before society. His words pierced deeper than I'd expected. For decades I'd carried his judgments, each one a fresh stone added to the pile on my shoulders. My deployments, distractions, my medals, cheap trinkets, my command, stubbornness dressed as authority. And now, on the day of my wedding, he had chosen to remind me again that I would never be enough. The door opened without warning and my brother Andrew walked in. He carried himself with the kind of confidence only someone endlessly adored could possess. Andrew had always been untouchable in my father's eyes, the golden son who could do no wrong. He caught sight of the uniform laid out beside me and laughed sharply, his voice slicing through me. "Come on, Elena. Dad's going to lose his mind. Can't you just act normal for one day?" To him, my uniform was nothing but a costume, a prop I'd chosen to flaunt. He didn't see the lives it represented, the sleepless nights, the blood it had cost. He only saw another chance to mock me. His grin lingered like he'd just delivered a witty blow, and inside me that old storm of anger and grief brewed. Andrew had never stood under a desert sky, waiting for orders that might decide whether his unit lived or died. He had never borne the weight of responsibility that came with sending others into danger. Yet he spoke with the smugness of a man who thought his corporate job and corner office made him superior. In his world he was the builder of a real life while I was merely playing soldier. And for years, my parents had let that story harden into the truth they chose to believe. As Andrew leaned lazily against the doorway, memories I'd tried to bury came rushing back. Every family gathering where his voice swallowed mine. Every vacation funded for him while I was left with hollow gestures and polite neglect. Every time my victories were reduced to footnotes in a household script written only for him. His laughter now wasn't just at the sight of my uniform. It was an echo of years spent being told that my path was wrong, my sacrifices meaningless, my accomplishments fragile illusions. I wanted to rise, to shout, to make him understand that what I wore wasn't dress-up. It was the weight of sleepless nights, the burden of choices made in split seconds that meant life or death. But I already knew it would be wasted breath. Andrew had always lived in a world where affirmation reigned freely, while I trudged through a desert, earning every drop of respect one grain at a time. His taunt was just another reminder of the family ladder where I had been nailed to the lower rungs. He drifted out of the room still chuckling, and I turned back toward the uniform, his words and my father's message burning holes in my thoughts. And yet, beneath the heat of anger, something steadier surfaced. That battlefield calm, that trained clarity. They could scoff, but the truth was that this uniform commanded power they couldn't comprehend. And in that chapel, whether they wished it or not, they were going to witness exactly who I had become. The memory of a Christmas dinner still claws at me. Charles, my father, at the head of the table like a king in his court. My mother, Evelyn, hovering at the edges, smoothing every ripple of conflict, pretending not to notice the imbalance pulsing through the room. At the center sat Andrew, basking in their admiration, his stories of boardroom triumphs spilling into the air as though the night itself belonged to him. He spoke of promotions and profit margins, and with every boast came nods and smiles, applause in everything but name. I sat in silence watching the cycle play again. His words, their praise, my erasure. When a pause finally came, I slipped in softly, mentioning that I'd been awarded a distinguished medal only weeks before. I didn't whisper out of shame, it was resignation. I knew what would follow. My father's eyes flicked toward me for the briefest second, his hand patting my arm as though I were a child offering a trinket. Another little badge, he said with a dismissive grin, before pivoting back to Andrew with thunderous pride. In an instant my achievement dissolved, smothered under the glow they saved only for him. I faded again, a ghost at my own family's table. That night I sat in my car outside their house, frost creeping along the glass. I stared at the steering wheel, replaying that moment until it stung raw. Maybe I thought it was only carelessness. So I called my mother, desperate for some balm. Her voice was soft, practiced, the same tone she'd always used to sand down the sharp edges of my father's words. She said he was from another era, that he didn't understand my world, that he just wanted me settled. Settled. The word dropped into me like ice water, shrinking years of command, grueling deployments and hard-earned authority into nothing more than a phase he thought needed correcting. In that silence, truth cut through me like steel. They would never see me as I was. In their eyes, I would forever be the daughter straying too far, chasing something too foreign, too unrecognizable to fit their narrow world. Their recognition was a gate that would never open. And I understood then I'd have to live without it. The ache of that knowledge would follow me until I forged something unshakable of my own. The radios crackled with a faint hum, the kind of static that filled the silence before a storm. Every man in that operations room sat rigid, waiting on me. On the monitor, the feed stuttered, grainy footage of a warehouse where hostages huddled in the dark, and the Special Forces team crouched like shadows just beyond the walls. Time was bleeding away. The team leader's voice broke through, calm but edged with urgency, requesting clearance for a maneuver that could either save everyone inside or bury them all. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. Veterans with scars and decades of battle behind them held their breath, waiting for my judgment. My heart hammered in my chest, but my tone never wavered. Green light, Alpha. Report once secure. The reply came sharp and clean, my call sign rolling back through the comms. Copy, Athena. The name carried through the room like steel. It wasn't banter and it wasn't ceremony. It was trust forged in fire, the certainty that when I spoke, lives followed. In that space I was not dismissed, not minimized. I was seen and I was obeyed. But even there, my father's text replayed like poison in my mind. Ridiculous costume. Taunting me with the same disdain I'd endured my whole life. For years I'd wasted breath trying to explain myself, parading medals before eyes that refused to see. That part of me was gone. My wedding wasn't his stage and it wasn't his chance to smirk at my choices. It would be mine. I smoothed the uniform across the chair, calm as a blade sharpened to its edge. No lace, no silk. Only the stars I had fought for, gleaming with a truth he could never dismiss. If respect was the only language he understood, then I would speak it fluently. Every detail of the ceremony was set like a battle plan. My officers seated with precision in the front rows. My honor guard drilled to perfection. The fleet admiral himself ready to officiate in full regalia. Piece by piece, the service would become a demonstration. They thought they were coming to witness a wedding. Instead, they would witness a reckoning. The organ swelled, notes reverberating against the stone, and then came the boots. The sharp rhythm of soldiers striking floor. 2 commandos entered from the wings, uniforms gleaming, steps synchronized and took their posts like living statues. The pews were a sea of white and gold, disciplined, silent. Civilians in their polished suits and glittering jewelry shifted uncomfortably, whispers rippling like static as they realized this was not their world. The organ's cry deepened, the chapel doors burst open and sunlight poured across the aisle. I stepped into it, the dress whites of an admiral blazing under the glass light. The stars on my shoulders burned like truth itself. The hush that followed was absolute. My father leaned toward Andrew, his mouth twisting into that cruel little grin. "She looks absurd," he muttered, loud enough for the closest rows to hear. The words were meant to cut me down, small and sharp, but I kept moving, steady, unbroken. And then it came. A voice cracked through the still air, sharp as a rifle shot. "Admiral on deck." The command ricocheted off the stone walls. In one motion, one thunderous surge, 150 soldiers rose to their feet. The echo of boots and the snap of hands into salute rolled through the pews like a tidal wave. The room trembled with the sound of discipline, with recognition so absolute it swallowed every whisper. Civilians gasped, their chatter silenced into awe. Senators, captains, commanders, all standing shoulder to shoulder, eyes locked on me with a reverence my family had never spared. This was not applause. This was truth made visible. Earned, undeniable, unshakable. My gaze cut through the saluting ranks until it landed on the front pew. My mother's hand clutched her mouth, her face ashen. Andrew sat slack-jawed, arrogance stripped clean away. But it was my father's eyes that held me, his smirk dissolving into disbelief, then anger, and finally a hollow dread as the reality took root. This wasn't dress-up. This wasn't rebellion. The 4 stars on my shoulders carried more weight than all of my father's wealth, charm, and hollow speeches combined. For the first time in his life he was forced to see me, truly see me, and it stripped him bare. He sat pale, trembling, a man cracked open by the reality that his daughter commanded loyalty from warriors he could never comprehend. The reception hall glowed under chandeliers, light bouncing off portraits of admirals and glass displays filled with medals of campaigns long past. Conversation rolled like a steady tide, senators, commanders, and operators surrounding me with words of honor and sacrifice. For the first time in years I felt whole, no longer fighting to be heard. Every handshake carried respect, every exchange affirmed that this was my world, one I had built with service and grit. Across the room my family clustered together like outsiders. Their expensive clothes and rehearsed smiles looked paper-thin against the uniforms and ribbons that carried the weight of real history. No one sought them out, not from malice but because they simply didn't belong. They were shadows in a room alive with meaning. I saw Andrew staring down at the floor, his usual arrogance extinguished. My mother clutched her glass too tightly, her words drying up before they ever left her lips. And my father, once so loud, so commanding, looked small, diminished. His certainty hollowed out by a truth he could not bend. They had no audience here. No stage, no control. And so, as the night went on, they slipped out quietly through a side door. No farewells, no congratulations, only silence trailing behind them. I didn't follow and I didn't mourn their absence. Their leaving left no emptiness. It was a confirmation of what I had already learned. Blood ties mean little without respect. Years later, I stood in my office overlooking Washington. The city stretched beneath me like a map of choices made and roads taken. My career had carried me farther than I once dared to imagine, each step paid for with sacrifice but rewarded with something greater. The respect of those who understood the true burden of command. At home life was steady with Ryan, my husband and fellow officer. He bore his own scars, his own weight, and he never asked me to justify mine. Our love wasn't measured in approval or conditional praise. It was built on mutual strength, born of the same fire we had both walked through. When I thought of family now, I didn't think of bloodlines or obligations that had once chained me. My real family was the circle of people who chose to stand with me not because they had to but because they wanted to. It was a family made of loyalty, trust, and love that endured when everything else fell away. Legacy isn't something handed down. It's something carved with sacrifice, with choices that outlast you, with respect earned when others rise to acknowledge who you are. I've learned that family isn't who you're born to. It's who walks beside you when the world demands your strength. If you've built a family like that, out of loyalty, respect, and trust, I want to hear it. Share your story below. Your voice matters here. And your journey may be the one someone else needs to keep going.